Hi folks, today we're going to talk about hems, rolled, turned and raw. Learn how to finish off your garments with these basic hemming techniques for wool, silk and linen. Hemming is an essential step in making sure your garments hold up to use and don't fray. Textiles are valuable commodities, and alongside seam treatments in construction, hemming is one of the most basic ways that you can protect your gear. Most hems were turned at least once, sometimes twice, and they're about 6mm. They're not large at all. They're very careful with their fabric because fabric is time and massive hems are a waste of both. The only stitch that you're going to need today is whip stitch, also known, handily enough, as hemming stitch. If you haven't got the hang of that yet, there's a link in the description and I'll pop a little card up there. That's the tutorial for that stitch. So if you need to have a quick look at that before we start, go and do that now. The stitching for hems mostly follows the same pattern as it does for the construction seams. So you're looking at 1 to 3 stitches per centimetre for wool, 3 to 5 stitches per centimetre for linen, and 4 to 6 stitches per centimetre for silk. Small regular stitches will always work best. Wool or linen thread can be used to sew wool garments. However, if you're sewing on linen, stick with your linen thread. With silk, if you can get hold of silk thread, fantastic. Otherwise, you can use a fine linen. So, let's get stuck into these seams. Okay, the first type of hem I'm going to show you today is the rolled hem. These are absolutely brilliant if you want to use the least fabric possible for your hems. It's often used on silks and fine linens. Now, to make a rolled hem, you do exactly what it says on the tin. You can see here I've started off this row already. The way that we make this is literally just rolling this down onto itself to get the teeny tiniest hem we possibly can. Now, my hands are a little bit dry today, and you may find this as well. Can be a little bit difficult to get it started. Licking your fingers often the best way to start rolling. Gives you a little bit more grip. You want to roll it just until everything is tucked under and there's none of that raw edge left. You want to make sure there's rolled enough that you're catching, not the raw edge, along this part here. And then you're going to pop a pin in just to secure that while you're working. That in there. Now I'm going to do one more because I want to show you the 2 stitch types that you can use for this type of hem, because while this is quite fiddly to do, there are 2 ways you can secure it down. So I'm just going to roll that there. Now, pinning like that, you're going to be working into the pins, so you may find it easier to roll away from you and then pin that way. Because if you're anything like me, I always work right to left with a whip stitch. It just works better for my hands. But you need to find which combination of rolling and pinning works best for you and results in the least amount of being stabbed. Now, you're going to secure this down with a whip stitch normally. And as you can see there, this is a standard whip stitch. We're going in just on the line here, coming across diagonally and catching the very edge of that piece there, that roll, and securing it down. Got any little loose threads like this, you just tuck it in as you go or cut it off, whichever you prefer. Now, whip stitching just the edge like that is one way that you can do this, or if you prefer, you can encase the entire roll with whip stitches. I'll show you that now. Now if you're like me, you might find it easier to work this way around, and if you're working this way, you can also see what you're doing because you're on the outside of the seam as well, which may help you to keep everything a little bit neater. This is one of those seams that, because it is quite fiddly, you're just going to have to try and find which way works best for you. So we've done a little bit there. Just see that that entire roll is encased in the stitching. Now if you're using a matching thread, you're hardly going to see this. You can make the stitches a little bit closer if you like. If you'd like to create almost an embroidery along the edge, you can keep those whip stitches really close together and encase it entirely. It's usually not necessary. So you just pick whichever style works best for what you're making. And there we go. Now I've got a piece of silk here. You can see how easily that wants to fray. If you're using silk, it's a perfect place to use a rolled hem because you can make them absolutely tiny. If you don't want to fold, if you're making a cap or something like that where the edges are going to be seen, a little teeny tiny rolled hem like that is perfect. One particularly useful application for a rolled hem is for securing the bottom of a keyhole slit. If you imagine this keyhole slit here, your neckline's up there. Just a handy bit of fabric for demonstration purposes. This part here at the bottom is a weak point. It is prone to fraying and splitting with use. Now rolling your hems here and encasing them entirely with whip stitches just around this little bit here is a really handy way of preventing that split enlarging further or fraying with wear. You can see I've done that in this example here that I've got up on the screen now. The turned hem down the sides of the keyhole slit turns in to a rolled hem at the bottom and is reinforced with whip stitches. You could choose to roll the entire keyhole slit to keep the keyhole as narrow as possible if you wished. Now the end of the split can be rolled onto itself or a fine cord. This can give it a little bit more strength. This is effective in preventing the split enlarging further or fraying with wear. Now, by far the most common way to finish a hem is to turn the raw edge under either once or twice, depending on fabric type, and secure that turned edge down with whip stitching. This is a linen hem. You can see here it's double turned so that the raw edge is completely encased inside the seam here. Now again, with the double turned hem, you can choose to whip stitch all the way around if you want, but that will subject your thread to wear on this outside edge here. So I'd really recommend using the whip stitches just along this edge line here to hold it down. As you can see, really tiny stitches work brilliantly. The larger your stitches, the larger the risk of catching and damage. So you can see here I've got my raw linen edge and I need to encase that, as I've done just here with these ones, inside the hem as I pin it. In this case, clip it. So I'm going to turn first of all once and then twice. So none of that easily frayable linen is exposed. I've got a corner here. Don't often have to deal with corners, but the way I do it is I do one fold from that side, then one from that side, come in again, and then turn the whole lot. And that means that nowhere on either side, this side or here, around here, is there actually an exposed edge visible. That can take a little bit of fiddling about to get everything exactly in the right place. I suggest you take a little bit more care than I'm doing here because I'm doing this really quickly. But you can fold everything in neatly so that it's, that was unexpected, so that it's contained properly and equal. Just takes a little bit of fiddling about to get everything laying exactly where you want it. But by doing one side, then the other, then the first side, then the other again, you keep everything well enclosed. Now, sometimes you're going to find that things have gone a little bit off as you've gone along. Just fiddle about with it until you're happy, and then you've got your seam ready to sew. And again, we're going to use a whip stitch. I hide my thread tails in the seam I've already started if I'm carrying on. If you're just starting, you do this step and then just tuck the tail in a little bit further up there. So to anchor our thread, and the first thing we're going to do is make a knot. Come back through your thread there. Now, with a hem, it's exactly the same as when you're making one of these. We've already covered these. So I'm not going to show you me whip stitching all of this because you absolutely don't need to see all that. But because you're catching this very edge of a turned edge here, you've not got any loose thread here to worry about. You only need to catch a few threads to secure your hem really firmly. Now these stitches can be extremely small, just catching a few threads there, 1 or 2, maybe 3 maximum, on a double turned hem like this. Now we're going to have a little look at a single turned hem. Now on denser, heavier fabrics such as wool that are less prone to fraying, the edge was generally only turned once, as a double turn in this situation can make this hem really bulky, stiff, hard to work. So for wool that isn't going to fray very much, you may want to use a single turned hem. The process is exactly the same, except when you're pinning, you just pin the layer flat instead of double turning it, and whip stitch along exactly as we did before. Okay, fixed my thread in exactly the same way as I did before. The difference with one of these hems where you haven't got a turned edge to work is you need to come back just a little bit further to make sure that you're catching enough of this weave that it's not going to come loose, and you want to keep your stitches nicely closely worked and close together. If the wool is a little bit more felled, which I'll show you in a minute, then you don't need to worry quite as much. But on the very delicate light wool like this, you just want to come back an extra few threads from what you would do if this was a turned edge. Now on a lighter wool, you can turn the edges. When I was sewing the dress that this scrap is from, I did actually double turn a lot of these edges anyway because it is very fine. But on something heavier where you can't, then you want to make sure that you're coming well back enough and keeping your stitches nice and close together. The aim with all of these things is to prolong the life of the garment, because once this starts to fray and come loose, then the integrity of the whole hem is at risk. And then you've got repairs to do, which isn't the most huge deal in the world, I know, but if you can protect your clothes well from the start, you will avoid needing to repair anywhere near as much. So get rid of that fluff. So there we have it. It's only a little sample there, but that line of whip stitching, it's nice and closely worked. Stitches are about 3 per centimetre, which is brilliant for using on wool, especially on things that are lightweight like this, that are going to need that extra protection of closely worked stitches. Now, some of you may have spotted on this linen example here, you could also choose to use a closely worked herringbone stitch. to hold down your turned hem. The advantages of this stitch, other than it looks pretty, are its repeated back and forth passes, which when worked closely will hold the seam more firmly than the whip stitches. The disadvantage is it's slower to work up than whip stitching, definitely, and if it's too loose, if it's very widely spaced, then it can catch on things. You can see the difference on this example here. This herringbone, pretty closely worked, very tightly spaced. This version is quite a bit looser and it moves a lot more. It's a lot easier to catch or damage. So try and keep whichever stitch you're doing as neat and small as you can for best results. If you'd like to use herringbone stitch and you're not sure how to do it, I've got a tutorial which I'll pop up in the cards for you. Now, speaking of herringbone, another variant of the stitch that I cover in that video we just linked up in the cards there is particularly useful for covering raw edges. Now we'll cover that stitch a bit more in part 2, but that does lead us neatly on to the last things I want to say about hemming today. Now hopefully everybody knows what I mean when I say raw edges. It's this cut piece of the fabric here, where the weave is cut through to shape the piece of fabric. The selvage on this wool here is this little tiny bit along the edge there. You can hardly see this one. On a modern wool, you'll see something like this. Now obviously this can't be left on your Viking Age garment. However, if you've got a handmade textile or you've got a really natural looking selvage, you may at one point or another want to just use the selvage edge itself as your hem. Now with wool as heavily felted as this, you don't actually need to turn it. And it's the same with the selvage edges. If you've got a nice authentic selvage, you may not want to turn that, especially sometimes selvages can have tablet braid down the edges. You may not wish to hem that at all, and because it's not going to fray, that's absolutely fine. However, if you've got a selvage edge like this fabric here, very unlikely to fray very much. There's a tiny little bit starting there. But if I just tug on that, it's actually really hard to dislodge anything, even intentionally. So this would hold up really well to just having either a cord or a braid attached to the edge here, or a simple stitch to enclose the whole raw edge. This here, just to show an example, is a selvage on linen. Now this is quite a modern one. Historical one wouldn't look like this. But you can see here how normally with a linen you double turn that edge, but because it's a selvage you don't need to. It's just secured down there with little tiny whip stitches, and that's going to hold up absolutely fine. It will be a little bit rough, so if you were making an undergarment you might want to cut it off or turn it anyway. But it is an option to leave selvages raw like that and just whip stitch them down. Most of the time when you're hemming a garment, there's going to be at least one turn involved. Most fabrics will fare far better turned like that. But say for example you've got a cloak or a hood, it's made out of a nicely heavily felted fabric and you don't want to do anything to that edge, you could run a whip stitch down it, or if you tune into part 2 you'll see some other seam treatments for raw edges and selvages there as well. Now the exception to this would be cloaks, which have fringes made from the warp threads themselves. That's a whole other deep dive, so we'll cover that separately. So let's quickly recap these 3 methods of finishing off a hem. We've got our rolled hem. These are excellent for lightweight linens and silk. They use the least amount of fabric possible to make a hem, and you can choose to just catch down the very edge of the roll for an extremely tiny and hard to notice seam. Obviously with the green linen it's quite obvious, but it won't be with a matching thread. Or if you want a more defined roll, you can go all the way around. Now if you kept this neater, obviously I've just done it quickly for the video here so it's very rough, but in a matching thread with nice regular stitches, whichever way round works best for you, you can get a lovely enclosed rolled hem to finish your silk or linen garment. Then we have our double turned hem on linen. enclosing that raw edge completely within the hem to stop it fraying or wearing. Little teeny tiny stitches, nice and closely spaced, will keep that hem solid for a nice long time. Because you are working with a turned edge, you can just catch the very edge of this turn here, just a few threads in, and it will still hold beautifully. Here we've got our example of the single turned hem, where these stitches come back just a little bit more to make sure that this turned edge is well secured down and isn't going to fray. The single turn's perfect for wool in most cases. Brilliant option. And that, my lovely folks, is where we're going to leave things today. Now you know the 3 basic ways that you can hem your Viking Age garments. Lovely. If you've got any questions or feedback, please pop it down in the comments or come and find me on Facebook. Part 2 of this video is going to be out soon, and in that one we're going to cover 2 of the specialist stitches that are used in hemming. Some of the more complex ways you might like to finish your hems and why you might like to use them. So until then, have an absolutely wonderful day everybody, and I will see you soon. Bye.